This is not the America I love, I have heard people say. We are better than this. What has happened to our country, I have heard. When we say things like this, we're trying to articulate a positive statement that the good country, founded on good principles and civic values, is not apparent. That what's going on right now is, by contrast, not good. Not in keeping with our good values, that good foundation that we see. And I want to let you know there's a flaw in that logic. There's a flaw in that argument. Our country was founded through the genocide of indigenous people. Our country was built on the labor of enslaved people. There's growing awareness that our criminal justice system is built around protecting property first. And even originally that included slaves. And some argue that there are echoes of that still happening today. Capitalism is structured around not benefiting creators or laborers or even society in general. Capitalism is structured around benefiting owners. So there's this tension that's in place when we say something like, this is not the country that I know and love. Because it is. What we're seeing now very often has an echo that can very easily and obviously be traced back to some of the flaws, some of the injustices, some of the cruelty that was baked into it when we started. But you're also not wrong. There's a tension here. You know, we as a country came together and wrote promises. Wrote a statement of this is who we are and we long to be, about equity and equality, endowed with unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that all people are created good. That was part of it. There's a piece in the 1963 speech that King made that is perhaps his most famous one, I Have a Dream. The beginning of it, before he gets rolling, he talks about a promissory note. He says, in a sense, we have come to our nation's capital to cash a check, he said. The architects of our republic had made, with magnificent words, in the Constitution and in the Declaration of Independence, promises. And we see this as a promissory note for a guarantee of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And he says, it's obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt, he said. He refused to let only the critique stay, but to also honor that we had made a promise for who we could be. This is not my America, we say. This is not the country I love, what I'm seeing happening in our streets. Well, yes. Yes, it is. We are flawed from the beginning, and we have greatness baked into who we could be, but we need to work for that part. The tension is that we have both the rot and the promise at our foundation, and that our work is to feed the promise and cut out the rot. Both are true. When you wonder about what's gone wrong, part of the answer is things are going as planned. We are in the logical outcome of the trajectory that we've been on for a while. And that doesn't mean that we're done. It means there's a tension in the system. So what are we to do about that? What do you do with this? It means that we need to participate. We need to build the more perfect union. We need to engage. In that 1967 speech that we used for our reading, Dr. King talked about, we would say today, intersectionality. He talked about the triple evils of militarism and materialism and racism, and he wove those three into this one paragraph that I absolutely love. Your whole structure must be changed, he said. A nation that will keep people in slavery for 244 years will thingify them and make them things. That's the racism. And therefore you will exploit them and poor people generally, economically. There's the poverty. And a nation that will economically exploit people will have foreign investments and everything else, and will have to use the military to protect them. The problems are all tied together. So this entanglement of racism and poverty has been on people's radar for a while. Folks have noticed that how economic struggle tends to land disproportionately on people of color. We've noticed that for a while, but King is also saying that poor people are exploited in our current system, full stop. Not just that African Americans, black people are exploited, poor people of every race and ethnicity are exploited in our current system. And then he ties it to the military by saying that the country will need to prop up its work with foreign investments that need protecting, thus a military. But the militaristic state and the use of state violence is not just beyond our borders. It is well recognized. King lived through the use of state violence against poor people and against African Americans in particular. Yes, we usually do outsource our foreign wars with proxy wars lately, and who knows, that might be changing soon, but the militarism evil that he's talking about is not just beyond our borders. It's happening here within our borders as well, against our own people. King called for nonviolence. Often when folks wake up to this sort of a reality and see, or start calling out this reality that they see of this tension of things that have gone wrong, sometimes they'll lean into King and talk about nonviolence, and a lot of people remember his nonviolence and remember in particular his speeches and his rallies. But here's something that's so incredibly important. King spoke of nonviolent direct action. He never just spoke of nonviolence. He was not in favor of passivity, of backing down, of nonviolence in the sense of, I'm not going to get in the middle of anything because that might lead to violence. He was very much about encouraging people to get in the middle of things, to have direct action. That was incredibly important. To only speak of his nonviolence is a perversion of his legacy. Some of you have been in a class that Joe Von Roo and I have been co-leading over the fall. It's a class on democracy that meets online monthly, and folks come from multiple congregations to take part in this. And it's the very first class, back in October, I think it was. We talked about effective strategic escalation. And we talked about various types and levels of protest. And in fact, we used Gene Sharp's analysis. Gene Sharp is a decades-long scholar on nonviolent action. And he has for example, this one book that talks about 198 versions of direct action. And he breaks them down into three types: symbolic, non-cooperation, and alternative cooperation or intervention. So symbolic direct action is like a rally or hanging a banner. Non-cooperation is like a strike or a boycott, yes? Alternative cooperation or intervention is where you talk about things like sit-ins or traffic obstruction. The story that we shared with you, Sunnyside Mary, has some of these elements in it. You know, sitting in the good seat, that was intervention. That was like a sit-in, essentially. When she was wading in the water, that was some symbolic thing. It drew some of the shady side folks' attention, and it symbolically got something moving. And when they were all sitting in the fountain instead, that was some alternative cooperation again, some intervention, something new and different. I guess a strike or a boycott would be if all the students showed up, because technically they have to or they'll get detention. But they did something else, like they boycotted paying attention. That might have been so. That wasn't in the story. Dr. King called for people to do a variety of styles of nonviolent direct action. His famousness is often linked to his speeches. We're really into those rallies that he would have, but it is too easy to only do symbolic action. And if all you're doing is symbolic action, 60 years later, the country oppressors have figured out how to ignore you by now. It's not enough. It's good to do, and it's not enough. You need to have other things going on so the systemic powers will not simply ignore you. The structures that are in place need to have direct action that wakes people up, that gets people's attention, that is coordinated and planned so that it can be effective, but it needs to be direct action. And ultimately, all of that action needs to be accountable to the vulnerable people who are impacted most by the oppression and the consequences of such direct action. Which brings me around to an announcement that I have. I have been invited and I have responded to a call to action. The clergy in Minneapolis have put out a call saying, ICE is here and we want you to show up. They actually link it to Selma, when King put out a call for clergy and lay people to come and witness. It is not lost on me that part of the history of those 60s and that civil rights movement was that a Unitarian minister, James Reeb, went down and was killed. And when a white man from the North was killed, that had a different impact on the country than when all of the other men and women who had been killed, the people of color, that hadn't risen to the level of attention. I am not going to disparage anybody who is dramatically upset by the death of Renee Good, the murder of this white woman. Please notice all of the black people ICE has killed in this past year. Part of the systemic effectiveness that we are called to is to allow Renee Good's murder to activate us. We can unpack the racism of that eventually. We'll get there. We have from the 60s and on. But when King said we need to begin to ask the question, he began asking those questions about the triple evils 60 years ago. Are we still beginning to ask these questions? No. We need to keep moving. I have been invited to go to Minneapolis and to be accountable to the people who are there on the ground dealing with ICE directly. When I went to Standing Rock, some 8 years ago maybe, I made a point. I had to specifically come back and say I never wanted to risk arrest. There were some folks here who were disappointed that I was not arrested. Like the badge of having done a resistance means you get arrested. I was not invited. The clergy at Standing Rock were specifically not invited to do a civil disobedience that would risk arrest. In fact, there was one dude who stood up during the training the day before and said, and those of us who want to risk arrest, come over to the corner and we'll talk about doing additional things. One of the grandmothers, one of the elders, went to that circle, and there were like a dozen white people sitting on the floor as this elder yelled at them, "That is not what we asked you to come do. Our water protectors will risk arrest. You are here to witness." I have been called to Minneapolis. I don't know what they're going to ask of me, but I will be accountable to the people on the ground who are dealing with this directly. It has been made clear it is actually not safe to go to Minneapolis right now. If you are a person of color, or if you have a disability, or if you are an obviously trans person, it may not be a good choice for you to come to Minneapolis to respond to this call. It is not currently safe in Minneapolis to be a protester. Not safe to be an immigrant. It's not safe to be racially profilable in Minneapolis right now. And we need to be accountable in any direct action we are invited into to the people who will be impacted most by the consequences of that direct action. That's incredibly important. Yes, there are injustices and oppression that we are seeing in the world today that are cruel and beyond the pale. This is not the America that we want. It is the America that we have. The systems of oppression and injustice from our inception are echoing in to our current situation, and these systems are working as designed. And there is another layer of design, a promise of equity and opportunity and liberty, a layer of design that we need to engage and enact and make real. We need to build the more perfect union. May we hear the complaint as well as the call. May we learn that these calls are coming to you, to me. And that it is our work to respond, to build that new America that we hope can be. When I go to Minneapolis, I want to carry you with me. I'm not going to go alone. I've actually literally called another colleague, James Galasinski, up in Canton and said, "What seat are you going to be sitting on in the flight out of Syracuse? Because I'm going to sit right next to you." And we talked on the phone to make sure that was going to work. This is the stole I will be wearing. I want to bring you with me. I want to not go alone. I don't know how your theology will work to respond to this, but can you bless this? Can you bless me? Can you pray for me? Can you imbue this stole with your wishes for what will happen, what I might encounter, that you will be with me when I'm there on the streets? If that means you come up and you, touch the robe, say a prayer, if you just send good energy, if you want to drop extra money toward the discretion, I don't know how you bless things. But please, if you are willing, offer some blessings so that I can bring you with me when I go to Minneapolis, and that they will know that we are with them and that we care about this world and the society that we are recreating, the whole system. May we lean into the call and to the voices of those most marginalized and targeted. May we embrace the holy work of caring for each other and for those in need as we build the more perfect union. In a world without end, may it be so.